Hesiod, who you may know was a poet, a rough contemporary of Homer. The Graces were the name given to the three daughters of Zeus, the Greek Charites, whose names are roughly translated as radiance, joy, and good cheer. You've seen the Graces dancing, the three Graces, those ones, the statues. The Graces also show up in the Roman pantheon with the Latin name, the Gratiae. The word grace in English is descended from that Latin word, entering into English via Old French around the time of the Norman conquest. Grace can mean a lot of things. The Oxford English Dictionary, one of my favorite sources, identifies 36 distinct uses of the word spread out over nearly 1,000 years of the history of the English language. But most of the uses, I think, fall into two categories, both of which date back to Greek and Roman antiquity. The first meaning of the word is favor, or benevolence, or mercy, something that a person gives to another. When I let my students, for instance, hand in a paper late, I'm giving them a grace period. The second meaning of grace is gracefulness, whatever that is. I think we might say it refers to attractive or pleasing features of a thing. We can use it both to describe living and non-living things, as when we speak of the graceful flight of an eagle or the graceful lines of a sailboat. But we most often use it to refer to qualities of people, their appearance, their movement, their behavior. The first sense of grace as favor, has a long history in Christian theology. The need for divine grace is a central theme in Paul's epistles. In his letter to the Ephesians, he writes, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is a gift from God." The theme is picked up by the church fathers, especially St. Augustine. Augustine emphasizes that our talents and achievements are ultimately not of our own doing, but depend upon God. As he puts it, our merits are God's gifts. It is also a prominent theme in Luther's theology. Luther argued that we are saved sola gratia, by grace alone, by faith alone, but faith is what gives us grace. But let's not get into Luther. Grace enters the political sphere in the Middle Ages through the idea that kingship and nobility are granted by the grace of God, Dei gratiae. It is this idea that lordship is given by God as a favor to those anointed that accounts for the use of the term your grace to refer to royals and nobles. Grace, once granted to kings or other nobles, could be dispensed by them to their subjects. A king could, by his grace, grant subjects favors. He could grant pardons for wrongdoings. In all of these cases, these favors are understood as gifts that are given by the power of the Lord, not earned by the right or the merit of the recipient. We see the vestiges of the idea of grace in parts of our judicial system, especially in the pardon power. The second sense of grace is a little more different, more closely connected to those three graces of antiquity. Gracefulness is an aesthetic quality, something we find pleasure in beholding. Gracefulness is perhaps most immediately a quality of movement, like the gracefulness of a ballet dancer, but it also applies to social graces, the ability some people have to charm people, to say the right thing, to put people at ease. Gracefulness is also a kind of composure, the ability to make things look easy that are not, as when we say that someone shows grace under pressure. The two senses of grace have different grammars. Grace in the first sense describes an act of one conferring favor on another, while grace in the second sense is a property that people or things or actions can manifest. But we can see the connection between the senses when we contemplate how it is that people become graceful. Grace in the second sense often appears to be a God-given gift. Some people naturally have it, while many others don't. So if you have grace in the second sense, you might think it's something granted to you as an undeserved favor, whether it be by God, luck, genetic endowment, or whatever else. While it seems right to say that much of gracefulness is unearned, clearly not all of it is. The most graceful people in the world have often worked very hard to develop their gifts. I think again of the dancers that I know. Their movements are beautiful and they do make it look easy, but it is anything but easy. Their gracefulness required much training and great strength. How many of you have reflected on someone facing a trial or misfortune and thought to yourself, there, but for the grace of God, go I? I know I have a lot. Thanks again to the OED, I was able to look into the history of this phrase. Its origins are uncertain, but it is often attributed to a 16th century cleric named John Bradford, who is said to have uttered it while watching a man walk to the gallows. In this phrase, we see the theme dating back to St. Paul, that our good fortune, our talents, our very goodness are really gifts of God. But I don't think about God and grace in the way that Paul did. I don't see God as a being like a king who dispenses favor on some people and hardship on others. Given this, I've wondered why this phrase still resonates so much with me. And what I've realized is that when I think, there, but for the grace of God go I am really not thinking about God's grace per se, but about the fact that so much of what I am and what I do is a consequence not of my own efforts or choices, but of factors utterly beyond my control. I was just reading Barbara Kingsolver's wonderful novel, Demon Copperhead. Anybody read that? Great novel. It's set in Appalachia, and it chronicles the impacts of drug addiction on the lives of addicts and their families. The book relentlessly exposes the ways in which social circumstances ranging from the profiteering of pharmaceutical companies to the failures of the foster care system put innocent people at risk of harm and suffering. I've never struggled with addiction myself, but I know plenty of people who have, and I know that there, but for the grace of God, go I. This idea that the grace of God is just a marker for circumstances beyond our control is not my own idea, it's hardly a new one. I actually found a moving expression of the same idea in an 1889 report on prison reform in the United States. The authors write, "The saying has been ascribed to more eminent Christians than one on seeing a man led to the gallows, there, but for the grace of God, go I. By the grace of God, he did not mean a miracle, but a good home, a good education, good companions." There's a lesson, I think, to be learned from this remark. It may well be that the man led to the gallows finds himself there for reasons beyond his control, but these are not things that are ultimately beyond our control. We do have the power as individuals and societies to change the circumstances of others, to grant them grace. And this brings me back to Sarah McBride. So Sarah McBride arrived in Congress this January at the same time that the Republicans took over the majority and President Trump came to Washington with a mission to overturn all things woke. On his first day in office, he issued an executive order declaring that there are two immutable biological sexes. Eager to support the president, a number of congressional Republicans refused to refer to Sarah McBride by her legally adopted name, calling her instead Tim or Mr. McBride or the congressman from Delaware. And of course, they fussed a lot about bathrooms. Ms. McBride's response to all of this was, in my mind, a remarkable show of grace under fire. While a number of her colleagues eloquently rose to her defense, she herself did not rise to the bait and sought to downplay and diffuse the issue. Her reasoning, and I'm paraphrasing, was that she was in Congress to represent her constituents and not herself, and that her constituents were far more concerned about taxes and Medicaid than they were about where their representative went to the bathroom. Let me just read a quick passage when she's responding to a question from Ezra Klein in that interview I mentioned to you. This is what she says. She says, "People are hungry for an approach that doesn't treat our fellow citizens as enemies, but rather treats our fellow citizens as neighbors, even if we disagree with them, an approach that is filled with grace. On social media, we have come to this conclusion, rightfully so, that the grace and patience of marginalized people has often been abused, and that's true. But on social media, the course correction to that has been to eliminate all grace from our politics. It's How dare you have these conversations with people who disagree with you? How dare you be willing to work with people who disagree with you? How dare you compromise? How dare you try to seek common ground? And when you go out into the real world, there's a hunger for some level of grace, for us just not to be so angry at one another and so miserable. McBride's call for grace hasn't been welcomed by everyone in the trans community. In the view of some, she is selling out the trans community and not standing up for her principles. I think this dispute between McBride and some of her critics on the left reflects a constant conundrum in deciding how to face injustice. Every one of us, I am sure, has faced situations where we believe that those we care for are not being treated fairly. At work or school or at church, among friends or family, we find others who either accidentally or even deliberately act in ways that cause harm. This, I say, is true for everyone, but it is especially true for members of marginalized communities. And whenever these situations occur, we have a decision to make. Do we speak up? Do we object? Do we complain? Or do we just let it go? McBride has decided that her larger purposes are best served by letting an awful lot of injustice go. I doubt I could or would always do the same in her shoes, and I'm not even sure that it is the best course. But I am not in her shoes, and I think that what's right here is to grant her the grace to make her own judgments. I certainly agree with McBride that we need more grace in our politics, but I think we need to understand politics in a way that is far more encompassing than it often is as political parties and elections. Aristotle observed that humans are all political animals, meaning that we are social, that we live in community, and that in community we must find a way to live together with those who see the world differently than ourselves. And it is for this, I think, that we need grace. The main reason we need grace is that we cannot see by ourselves what it is like to be another. I think about my own journey understanding gender and sexuality. When I grew up in the 1970s, there were boys and girls. Girls were supposed to like boys and boys to like girls. And this all made perfect sense to me. I had my frustrations, of course, but I found no puzzles in who I was or what I wanted. Homosexuality was a theoretical possibility that I knew of, but no part of my world. It was not until I arrived in college and that I began to see the world of gay people. I was fortunate to be assigned a roommate who was gay and with whom I remain friends to this day, who gently let me in a little on what it was like to be him. Once I began to see his world, I realized that I'd always had gay friends, even in high school. I'd just been blind to it. Something similar has happened more recently as I have tried to understand the experience of trans folk. Gender dysphoria, for someone like me, is very difficult to comprehend. But I've been blessed to cross paths with a number of people who've had this experience and who have done their best to help me see something of the world through their eyes. Their acts of grace have given me a gift that has allowed me to see how folk who are so unlike me in some ways are so like me in what they hope for, what they fear, what they love, and what they cherish. But we don't need anything so socially complex as gender and sexuality to find places where we need grace to understand. It's everywhere. What's it like to grow up in a Jewish or Hindu family, or to have 5 siblings, or to live on a farm? What's it like not to have a home, or to be hungry? What's it like to be adopted? What's it like to live in a place where you don't speak the local language? What's it like to get about in a wheelchair or to live with a chronic disease? What's it like to lose a child to sickness or violence or war? I haven't faced any of these circumstances, and so I may need grace from those who have been in these places to know the special challenges and occasionally the special joys that come from them. We even need grace to understand the people who are closest to us, our spouses, our partners, our parents, our siblings, our children. How many of us have struggled to understand about a partner why some things that you care not a whit about are sources of great joy or worry to them, and why the things that seem important to you are not important to them at all? And then, of course, there are our teenage children, those creatures we love, and who are at once so near and yet so hard to understand. When I face such barriers, I know I have to start by watching and listening and reflecting, but sometimes those efforts by myself are not enough. Sometimes I will misstep because I don't understand, and I need those I misunderstand to grant me grace. And I may need to ask and hope that these people will help me understand what it is like to be them. They don't owe me this. My ignorance of their world is not on them, but I still need them. The sharing of grace is not a bargain we strike. It's not a transaction. It must always be a gift. Lastly, though, we must realize that grace is a gift that we can grant to ourselves. Perhaps it's just this ability to allow ourselves to make mistakes and to start again that we find what is truly meant by God's grace. We do not deserve grace and we do not earn it, but boy, do we need it. Grace in this sense is the source of our freedom and the possibility of hope. I'm going to close by returning to the story of John Newton and his conversion experience that transformed him from a slaver to an abolitionist. I'm convinced that no human can really hold another human in bondage if they can fully see them for who they are. I think that the grace that Newton found, beginning in that storm, was the grace to see the humanity of people who he once held in chains, and so more fully to see himself. So I say to you, whatever storms you find yourself in, I pray that you can find this amazing grace and that you will be able to say, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Sorry, I'm blind, but now I see. It always makes me cry. Thank you.